Hey you guys, and welcome back.
Okay, so before we get started, if you all could hit the like button for me, and if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. I will be so happy to have you. Also, make sure to hit the notification bell so that when I upload my future videos that you'll be notified. There will be probably 2 more videos going over this report at least, and then we're going to be moving on to some other articles and some other books and some other sources and references, so you don't want to miss out on that. Also, please be sure to share these videos, especially with other like-minded black women. Okay, we want to get the word out as much as possible. We want to try to get as many black women as possible on board and aware of what's going on. I know that a lot of us, especially as black women, the black community period, but we only know what's going on through the media, and the media solely focuses on black men. So you really can't blame many black women who are trying to juggle jobs and, caring for parents and caring for children and their own families and, their own lives and things that are going on. And the only thing that they're seeing is what they're seeing in the media. So they don't really see a lot of what's going on with black women to really know that there's that big of an issue. So it's really up to us to kind of get that word out and push that word out and to make them aware. And that's really the only way that we're going to be able to come together and try to talk about these issues, discuss and formulate solutions, is to make sure as many black women and allies, true blue mutual allies of black women, are aware of what's going on with black women and black girls in the black community. Okay?
So today we're going to be going over the second part of the report on black male racial victimhood. And I wanted to give a quick thank you to Paris Milan for shouting out the first video that I did on this report. So because this section, I think I'm going to try to get through the whole second section, and it's going to be probably about 4 pages. So I'm going to try to get through that in this video today. And so I may or may not do commentary at the end of this video. It just depends on how long it's going to be. But if not, then I'll just do commentary at the end when I finish doing all of the videos and going through the report. So this is section 2, which is Re-Conceptualizing Domestic Violence. A, on being fair game. Look at all these young women going to college. When you, black women, come with your degree, he, the black man, is already behind. The only thing he has is his physical strength and his sex. To have power, the white male broke the black male. Once your male is broken, you, black women, are fair game for being the victim. And that's a quote by Minister Louis Farrakhan to a predominantly female audience. Farrakhan's quote provides a useful point of departure to explore the way in which anti-racist discourse privileges black male experiences in the context of domestic abuse. For Farrakhan, there is a causal relationship between domestic abuse in the black community and racism against black men. The latter causes the former. Thus, although Farrakhan does not condone domestic abuse, he nevertheless suggests that because it is caused by racism, black women are fair game. It is the notion that black women are fair game that I want to examine. Not only does this notion have an exculpatory function, the emasculation of black men and the extent of their racial subordination excuses the abuse they inflict on black women. It has an obfuscatory function as well. Farrakhan's quote renders completely invisible the fact of black women's racial subordination. His male-focused approach to domestic abuse obscures the extent to which black women are also behind, and ignores the fact that to have power, the white male broke the black female as well. Significantly, I am not suggesting that Farrakhan is unmindful of the history of black women's subordination, or that he would take issue with the idea that the white male broke the black female. What I am suggesting, however, is that in advancing an anti-racist agenda, Farrakhan makes a normative judgment that black men are more deserving of the racial victim status than black women. Thus, even though presumably he would agree that black women have experienced racial subordination, they are still, according to him, fair game for being the victim, because black men experience racial subordination more so. To be sure, the women in the domestic abuse workshop were not making the argument that black women were fair game for domestic abuse. Nevertheless, their framing of the issue, can we afford to send another black man to jail, is perpetrator rather than victim-centered? One might reasonably respond to this question by asking another, can we afford not to? The next section employs the domestic abuse workshop as a window through which to further explore the privileged victim status of black men in certain anti-racist conceptualizations of domestic abuse. B. Locking up black men. Is that the answer? The reason a black man may beat his wife is because he is facing racism on his job and racism in America. What is the reason a white man beats his wife? It's certainly not because of oppression in America. That's a quote by Denise Cade, a securities lawyer in Washington. When I entered the domestic abuse workshop, one of the panelists, a police officer and president of the Police Officers Against Police Brutality, was providing an insider's perspective on some of the institutional barriers to victims of domestic abuse. Police officers decline to intervene in domestic disputes because they believe such disputes are a matter of private and not public concern. Moreover, many of the male officers identify with the male abuser. He said that it would not be unusual for a police officer, upon entering a domestic violence situation, to take the abuser for a spin in the police car or a brief walk to cool off. He underscored the fact that such conduct contravenes standard procedure, but wanted to make known the degree to which it was commonplace nonetheless. With respect to police training, he mentioned that progress was slowly being made, that officers were in fact becoming more sensitized to domestic violence, and that the presence of women on the force was helping. Where were the police when I was being stalked for over a year by a man I hardly knew? A woman 2 rows in front of me had stood up from her seat. She was calm and angry. She had a story to tell. I didn't even know the man that well, she continued. He never beat me, perhaps because he never got the chance, but he abused me, psychologically, emotionally. When he finished with me, I was a wreck. I used to have a full-time job, made a decent living. This man followed me from job to job. Where were the police? I called them. You know what they asked me? They wanted to know if he had physically harmed me. I told them no. They wanted to know if I knew where he lived. I told them no. They wanted to know if he came to my house. I told them no. You know what they told me? Tears appeared in her eyes and she shook her head several times. They told me, get this, that there was nothing they could do. Nothing they could do. She paused, perhaps re-experiencing the disbelief and frustration she must have felt upon realizing that she could be harassed with impunity and that she could not protect herself from it. I was being harassed by a man I hardly knew, and there was nothing the police could do. Now I know some of you are thinking, well, he didn't beat me. I got away lucky. I have no scars or bruises, but this shit lasted over 2 years. He would call my jobs. He would follow me from city to city. He showed himself to me a couple times in the street. The police didn't do anything. I'm now on welfare. These clothes that I'm wearing are from a church charity event. I have little money. I heard about this conference on a local radio station and I said to myself, I am not a lawyer, but I've got to go. I called up the radio station and got the name of the conference organizers. They were kind enough to give me a scholarship to come here. I'm glad to be here. There was silence as she sat back in her seat. A woman hugged her and gave her a handkerchief. The moderator broke the quiet with a question directed at the police officer. What are the women supposed to do when the police don't do their job? When you call them and they say, there's nothing we can do. When they come to your house and don't make an arrest. When they treat you as though you did something wrong. The police officer shuffled up from his chair and folded one hand over the other a few times before responding. Those are tough questions. Police officers are trained from day one in the police academy that domestic violence settings are one of the most dangerous situations police officers are asked to address. Some officers literally psych themselves up before entering a domestic violence situation. Many officers just don't want to deal with it. Also, there's a whole lot of paperwork to be filled out with domestic violence cases. Some officers feel, why arrest the man and go through all that paperwork when the wife and the girlfriend after a day or maybe even a few hours is going to bail him out? That's bull, the woman next to me said very firmly as she waved her hand to be recognized. Women are being beaten to death. People are dying and you're worried about paperwork. What about all the paperwork that has to be filled out when the woman is dead? I'm sure there's a whole lot more paperwork. Actually, it's not. the police officer responded somewhat apologetically. When a person dies, the paperwork is very simple. The woman beside me was still visibly upset. The police officer continued speaking. Look, I'm not saying that police officers are right to let how many sheets of paper you fill out dictate whether you arrest a person for domestic abuse. I'm just telling you the way it is behind the doors of police headquarters, how some police officers think about these issues. Another woman, one row behind me, dressed in Muslim attire, stood up. She began to recount her experience with domestic violence. I love that nigger. I would have done anything for him. I had his babies. I cooked for him, cleaned for him. It wasn't always bad. I think he loved me just like I loved him. Even when he was beating me, I think he loved me. We made good love, real good love, and we had beautiful children. Then the man just started beating me. The first few times I said to myself, I must be doing something wrong. I would try real hard not to make him mad. Take extra time to prepare the meals. Nothing worked. I tried to make myself scarce, real busy like. That didn't work either. He just kept beating on me. I couldn't leave. I didn't know how to leave. And where was I going to go? You don't just walk away from a marriage, leave your kids, your things. How was I going to do that? But when I couldn't take it anymore, I did leave, and I took my kids with me. Let me tell you about those shelters. They don't treat you like you're human. All that talk about going to shelters. Do you know what it's like to ask some woman for female toiletry and have her, a black woman too, just kind of throw it in your face? They beat you just as hard as some of those shelters. They don't use their hands or their feet, but they beat you so small you don't ever want to go back. I didn't tell you what my husband, I still say my husband, did that got me to leave. He tried to burn up me and my kids. I don't know why or how I woke up that night, but thank God I did. He had purchased some gas and had sprinkled it all around my bed. He was going to burn us alive, but I'm here today, and it took some white lesbians to put me back together. I'm not a lesbian, but those women built me up to where I am today. I can state but cannot express how this woman's story moved me. I sat fixed in my chair, wanting to say something to her, but I just sat there, still. One more woman told her story of abuse. She explicitly addressed the relationship as she saw it between racism against black men and the domestic violence black men inflict on black women. She saw black men as both victims and perpetrators in domestic abuse situations. She spoke about how white racism had functioned to emasculate black men to make them feel lesser than men. She explained how domestic violence can be thought of as a response to white racism, in as much as it is an assertion by black men of their manhood. She was clear to point out that she was not advancing political apologia for black men. She knew that she didn't deserve her abuser's repeated blows. She knew he had no right to physically abuse her. She wanted to raise the issue of whether locking up black men was such a good idea. She asked whether prison wouldn't simply make them angrier so that they would just find some other black woman to abuse. I hear you, sister. I don't think locking them up is the answer. A woman from the back row joined the conversation. Black men are an endangered species. Most of them are already in jails. We can't afford to lock up no more. The tension in the room was quite palpable. The black women versus black men battle was about to take place. Only black women would be battling from both political ends. Perhaps my characterization of battling here is pejorative, particularly in a social context where black women are perceived as sapphires, strident, emasculating women who don't seem to know when to shut up. None of the women were yelling. None was out of control. Yet there was a battle going on, a very controlled battle. It was the classic battle about gender and how it gets negotiated in the black community. It was a battle about how and when black women should support black men. It was a battle about constructing a political ideology that is situated in black women's as well as black men's racial experiences. I began to think about what the woman from the back row had said. Locking them up is not a good idea. Black men are an endangered species. I was a little uncomfortable with that statement. It was politically unsatisfying, incomplete. As Kimberly Crenshaw observes, it is probably true that racism contributes to the cycle of violence in communities of color, given the stress that men of color experience in a dominant society. But that chain of violence is more complex than the racism explanation pretends, and extends beyond this single link. Notwithstanding that I was unpersuaded by the woman's argument, I wasn't going to say anything yet. Other than the black male panelists, I was the only man in the room. I didn't want to create the impression that I was attributing a false consciousness to black women, that I was presuming to tell black women that they were privileging male subordination concerns in their fight against racism, that they were not seriously questioning the operation of patriarchy in their lives and the lives of other black women. It occurred to me that outside the conference, something similar was happening in the anti-racist discourse about the O.J. Simpson case. I realized that the battle that was taking place in the workshop was related to why, according to several polls, 2/3 of the black community thought that O.J. Simpson was not responsible for the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Notwithstanding that Simpson lived in a predominantly white community, married a white woman after divorcing a black woman, golfed at white country clubs, and was not politically involved in the black community, he became a symbol of racial injustice. Indeed, his trial witnessed his rebirth as a black man. It occurred to me that some black people perhaps were understanding the O.J. Simpson case in two political narratives, both of which privileged the gender of black men, and that these narratives provided at least a partial explanation for the anti-racist construction of Simpson as an icon of racial victimization. I refer to these narratives as the black male/white victimhood narrative and the black male/white female narrative, i.e. the narratives. Both of these narratives, though they are not explicitly about black women, indicate how black women's experiences are marginalized in anti-racist discourse. Employing these narratives, I will demonstrate the interrelatedness of sexism and racism in the Simpson case by showing, among other things, that the sexism that makes wife murder forgivable and the racism that criminalizes black men are not parallel. On the contrary, a close examination of the Simpson case reveals how they support and buttress each other, and particularly as they affect black women, come together in a seamless whole. The application of the narratives to the O.J. Simpson case, moreover, will illustrate that in anti-racist discourse, the construction of blackness as a subordinated identity and the description of racism as an oppressive experience take place within collective cultural and political symbols which privilege the victim status of black men. So, sisters, what did you think about this second section of this report? Put your thoughts and comments down in the comments section. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. You guys have a great day, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks.